Have you ever felt like something inside you was missing, but you couldn't name it? Like your heart was soil that had never known the touch of rain? That was me. Sitting alone in the back row of a church I hadn't stepped into in over a decade, I didn't come to find answers. I came because I had nothing left to lose. My life was full, on paper. A steady job. A roof over my head. A smile I wore well. But beneath the surface? I was tired. Empty. I had tried everything to feel whole. Self-help books, weekend getaways, scrolling through endless noise trying to distract my soul from the ache it carried. But the ache never left. That morning, I heard something I couldn't shake. The preacher didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. He just said gently, "You can't grow fruit without first being rooted in love." Something in me cracked. Not because I understood it, but because I didn't. What kind of love could grow anything in someone like me? I had been told about God's love, but I'd never seen it bear fruit. Not in me. Not in anyone I truly knew. But that morning, I began to wonder, what if it was real? What if it could change me, not from the outside in, but from the inside out? This is the story of what happens when love is no longer just a word, but the seed of a whole new life. If you've ever wondered whether something beautiful could grow from your brokenness, subscribe now. You're not alone, and this might be the story that begins to change everything. I didn't plan to cry that night. I don't cry, not in public. But there I was, slouched against the cold tile wall of my apartment bathroom, the echo of my sobs bouncing between porcelain and silence. My phone screen was still lit, a text message I'd stared at for 20 minutes before finally reading the whole thing. 4 sentences. That's all it took to tear open every scar I thought I had healed. You always say the right things, but you're empty inside. You love people only when it's convenient. I hope one day you figure out how to care for real. Her words weren't said in anger, they were said in truth. And truth, when you've been hiding from it, hits harder than any slap. I had spent years performing the right version of myself, helpful, light-hearted, always with a quick answer or a joke to fill the room. But deep down, I knew I'd never let anyone all the way in. Not even God. Especially not Him. I'd prayed, sure. But only when I wanted something. I said I believed, but there wasn't much in my life to show for it. My heart had grown hard, dry, tired. In that bathroom, I finally asked what I'd been avoiding. What happened to me? I couldn't remember the last time I felt real joy, or even real sadness that wasn't buried under distraction. My soul was numb. That terrified me more than the shame. I realized I hadn't been living, I'd just been existing. And whatever spark I used to have had been gone so long, I wasn't even sure it was ever real. That night I didn't make any big declarations. I didn't promise to turn my life around. I just whispered one raw thing. God, if you're still there, do something. I can't anymore. It wasn't poetic. But it was honest. And somehow, that was enough. The next morning, something stirred, nothing dramatic, just a strange pull in my chest. A name popped into my mind, Calvary Chapel, a tiny church I passed every day on the way to work but had never once entered. It wasn't fancy. Just brick walls, a wooden cross, and a hand-painted sign that said, "The Spirit still moves." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even believe it. But I went. I sat in the very back row, hoping no one would notice me. They didn't. Not in the way I feared, at least. No stares. No forced smiles. Just a few nods from strangers who looked as tired as I felt. The place was simple. Worn carpet. Dim lighting. Nothing like the polished megachurches I'd grown used to watching online. But something about it felt honest. Like the place wasn't trying to impress anyone, just make space for God to show up. The pastor stepped forward. An older man with kind eyes and a voice like a grandfather's, slow, deliberate, and warm. He opened his Bible and said, "We're going to talk about seeds today." I almost left. I wasn't in the mood for metaphors. But something kept me glued to that seat. "Seeds," he said, "don't grow in the light. They grow in the dark. They start buried, pressed beneath soil, hidden, forgotten. But under the weight of the earth and the silence of waiting, something miraculous happens. That shell cracks, and life begins. He looked up, scanning the room. Some of you feel buried. Some of you feel like nothing is growing. But I want to tell you something. God does His best work in the dark. That hit me like a lightning bolt. He wasn't saying everything would change overnight. He wasn't even promising things would feel better. But for the first time in a long time, someone was telling me that maybe, just maybe, this season of silence, of pain, of loneliness, wasn't punishment. It was planting. I walked out of that church into the afternoon sun with more questions than answers, but one thing had shifted. For the first time in years I had hope, not in myself, not in my circumstances, but in the quiet possibility that God hadn't given up on me. That maybe, beneath all my brokenness, something had been planted. Something sacred, something alive. The next Sunday, I returned to Calvary Chapel. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even plan on it. I just woke up, sat at the edge of my bed, and whispered, "All right, I'll go." No lightning bolt. No overwhelming urge. Just a quiet nudge, like something inside me knew I needed to be there again. Not for answers. Not for inspiration. But because something was beginning to soften, and I didn't want to lose it. I sat in the same seat as before. Back row, far left. Still invisible, still guarded, but a little less hollow. The pastor was teaching on grace this time. I thought I knew what that meant. I'd heard the word thrown around in church circles my whole life. But the way he described it that morning, it undid me. Grace, he said, isn't just forgiveness. It's nourishment. It's what feeds the seed God has planted in you. Without it, nothing grows. Not joy. Not love. Not change. And here's the kicker, grace is not earned. It's received. I must have stopped breathing. My chest felt tight. My whole life, I had worked to earn approval, family, friends, even God. I performed. I pleased. I kept the peace, told the right jokes, avoided the hard conversations. And now he was telling me none of that ever produced growth? After service, I stood up to leave quickly, but a hand gently touched my shoulder. I turned and saw a woman, maybe in her 70s, with deep smile lines and bright blue eyes that looked like they'd seen decades of pain and still chose joy. "You're new," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Just a recognition. "Yeah," I muttered. "Just visiting." "Well," she said with a kind grin, "you can visit as long as you need. Just know you're already loved. Whether you believe it or not." She handed me a small card with her name on it, June Ellis. On the back it read, "Don't grow weary. The roots go deeper before the branches grow higher." Galatians 6 verse 9. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me with that kind of certainty. Like she knew I was struggling but wasn't afraid of it. Like she saw past the surface and still smiled. I kept that card in my wallet. Later that week, I was cleaning out a junk drawer in my kitchen when I found an old devotional I had been given years ago and never opened. It was covered in dust. For some reason, I flipped it open. The very first page said, "If you want to know what God's love can do, stop trying to fix yourself and let Him tend to your roots." It was the same message, just in a different voice. A second seed. Another drop of water. That Saturday, I went to the church pantry where June volunteered. I told myself I was just going to help restock shelves and sneak out early. But June found me within 10 minutes, arms full of canned goods and stories that we spent hours sorting and laughing and, eventually, sitting down with a woman named Carla who came in with 3 kids and a face worn thin from life. Carla didn't ask for much, just a few bags of rice, some cereal, and soap. June didn't just give her supplies. She gave her time. She held Carla's hand. She prayed over her without sounding rehearsed. And when Carla cried, June cried with her. I had never seen grace lived out like that. It wasn't polished or flashy. It didn't look like power. It looked like presence. Like mercy poured out slowly, steadily, just enough for today. And in that moment, I realized something. I had always thought of God as far off, watching from above, waiting for me to measure up. But what if grace meant he was already here? What if he had been all along, right in the middle of my mess, not asking me to fix myself, but just to let him in? I went home that night and stood in my kitchen, holding that same card from June. I read it over and over until the words stopped being just ink on paper and started feeling like truth. Don't grow weary. Because love doesn't grow overnight. Grace isn't a magic switch. It's the soil. It's what surrounds the broken places, holds the pieces together, and says, "You're not done yet." I wanted to believe it. I truly did. That grace could be real. That love, real love, could actually grow something in me. But the more I leaned into it, the more something inside pushed back. Not out of pride. Out of fear. I didn't know how to receive love without suspicion. I didn't know how to stand still and just be loved. That Sunday, the message was about the Father's heart. The pastor told the story of the prodigal son, how the father ran to his boy, embraced him in rags, and never even let him finish his apology. People around me were nodding, whispering, "Amen," even wiping their eyes. But I sat still, arms crossed, heart clenched. It felt like a story meant for someone else. Someone not as complicated. I kept asking myself, why is this so hard for me? Why did the very thing I was starving for, unconditional love, feel like a foreign language? That night, I found myself in front of an old photo box. Buried under receipts and broken earbuds, it hadn't been touched in years. But something pulled me there. I opened it and saw a picture of me at 7 years old, birthday hat tilted sideways, frosting on my cheek, trying so hard to smile. I remembered that day. My dad had called 10 minutes before the party to say he couldn't make it. "Work ran late," he said. Mom pasted on a smile and handed me another slice of cake. I told everyone I was fine. But something inside me stopped reaching for him that day. As I looked through those pictures, school plays, report cards, first days of school, I saw a pattern I hadn't noticed before. I was always smiling. Always looking like I had it all together. Always earning attention. Even in the church youth group, I was the polite one. The helper. The peacemaker. But I don't think I ever let anyone see the real me, not the angry, disappointed, needy version. Love felt foreign because I had learned to survive without it. I had built my entire personality on the belief that being low maintenance made me worthy. If I didn't need too much, I wouldn't be left again. That belief had followed me into adulthood. Into relationships that were shallow but safe. Into jobs where I overperformed to keep the peace. Into faith that was more performance than presence. I didn't even realize I had done it, until grace started pressing on the cracks. The next time I saw June, she asked how I was doing. I shrugged, gave her a tired smile. "Fine." She didn't buy it. "You ever let anyone really see you?" she asked. "The parts that still ache?" I opened my mouth to answer but couldn't. She sat beside me on the steps outside the pantry and said, "I used to think being strong meant hiding my pain. Then I realized the Lord can only heal what we're willing to reveal. You can't receive love if your hands are always busy covering the wounds." Tears burned behind my eyes. "What if I don't know how?" "That's okay," she said gently. "Start by being honest with him. You don't have to have the words. He just wants the truth." That night, I sat in bed and tried to pray. Not a polished prayer. Just raw honesty. "God, I don't know how to let you love me. I've been holding it together for so long, I don't even know what's real anymore. But I want to believe you're not like them. That you won't leave. That you see me. All of me. And still stay. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing changed in the room. But I felt something shift. Like a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying had been acknowledged. That was the first moment I realized love doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it starts as a quiet presence, whispering, "I see you. And I'm not leaving." Over the next week, I started letting little things in, worship lyrics that used to sound cheesy, now soaking into my chest like medicine. Scripture verses that felt strangely personal. A note left on my windshield from someone at church. You matter more than you know. No name. Just love. And slowly, very slowly, the walls began to lower. It started with the smallest things. Not thunder, not fire. Just quiet, steady drops, like gentle rain falling on dry ground. A verse would linger longer than it used to. A worship song would suddenly bring tears I couldn't explain. I wasn't chasing emotional highs. I didn't trust those anymore. But something inside me was softening, like the surface of my soul was finally letting water seep in. It was a Tuesday when I first noticed it. I was in the grocery store, tired and distracted, when a young mom in front of me started fumbling through her purse. Her toddler was screaming, her hands were shaking, and the line was backing up. I could feel the tension rising. The cashier looked annoyed. The man behind me sighed loud enough for the whole store to hear. She pulled out a few wrinkled bills, short by just a couple of dollars. I didn't think. I just stepped forward, handed the cashier my card, and said, "I've got it." She turned to me with eyes wide and full of disbelief. "You don't have to," she whispered, voice trembling. "I know," I said. "It's okay." She didn't say much after that. Just nodded, gathered her things, and whispered, "Thank you," with a mix of embarrassment and relief. And as she walked away, something happened inside me. Not pride. Not the satisfaction of doing something good. It felt sacred. Like I had brushed up against something bigger than myself. That night I sat in my car, engine off, just thinking. That moment in the store had felt so ordinary, just a quick choice, a few dollars, a stranger. But it stirred something. It felt like a crack had opened in the sky, and just for a second, light had touched the earth. Was that the Holy Spirit? I asked myself. Could he move like that? In grocery lines, not just prayer rooms? Later that week, I asked June about it while we stacked food boxes together. "Do you think God really uses us like that?" I asked. "Even when we're still a mess ourselves?" She smiled, almost like she'd been waiting for the question. "Sweetheart, the Spirit doesn't wait for you to be finished. He works with what you give him. Even if it's a half-healed heart and 2 loaves of bread." I let that settle deep down. I'd always believed the Spirit was something holy, distant, reserved for preachers or people who had it all figured out. But now I was beginning to see him as something much closer. Not a lightning strike, but a whisper. A nudge. A hand guiding mine before I even realized I'd reached out. The next Sunday, I stayed after service. Usually, I slipped out fast, hoping to avoid small talk. But something made me linger. The worship team had finished, the crowd was thinning, and the lights were beginning to dim. I stood near the back, watching people laugh, pray, hug, simple, human moments full of invisible grace. June saw me and waved me over. She introduced me to a man named Leonard, quiet and gentle with tired eyes and calloused hands. "Leonard," she said, "this is the one I told you about. The one who's starting to bloom." I froze. "Bloom?" I echoed, surprised. She chuckled. "You've been buried, but you're not dead. The Spirit's moving. I can see it in your eyes." Leonard looked at me kindly. "You ever watch rain fall on cracked dirt?" he asked. "At first, it just sits there, like the earth forgot how to drink. But give it time, and it sinks in. That's how it starts." I didn't say much in return, but my heart heard every word. That week, I started praying differently. Not with a list of needs or polished words. Just real, simple honesty. Some nights I said nothing at all. Just sat in silence and tried to feel his nearness. Other nights, I wept without knowing why. Like something buried was finally being washed clean. The Spirit wasn't loud. He didn't demand. He didn't shame. He just stayed. Like gentle rain falling again and again until dry ground couldn't help but yield. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just believing in God. I was experiencing him, and slowly, things began to grow. I wish I could tell you that after that first rain, everything changed. That I woke up the next morning glowing with joy, free from doubt, and fully healed. But that's not how roots grow. They don't rush. They don't make noise. They go down, deep into the quiet, unseen places. And that's exactly where I found myself. 1 week passed. Then another. I was still showing up to church, still talking with June, still volunteering at the pantry. But underneath the surface, I started to wrestle. It was subtle at first, just a creeping question. Why isn't more happening? Why don't I feel different yet? I thought I'd cracked open. I thought the Spirit had started something. But the days felt normal. My temper still flared at work. I still felt impatient when my prayers went unanswered. And even though I wanted to believe God was changing me, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was just pretending again. 1 morning, I finally said it out loud. June and I were having coffee before the food truck arrived. She was stirring cream into her mug when I blurted out, "I don't feel like I'm growing." She didn't look surprised. She just sipped her coffee, then asked, "Have you ever watched a tree during winter?" I blinked. "What?" "It looks dead," she said. "Branches bare. No flowers. No fruit. But underneath the soil? The roots are doing their work, stretching deeper, anchoring stronger. You don't see it, but it's real. That's where patience is born." I stared into my own coffee, silent. June leaned closer. "Don't confuse silence with absence. Some of God's greatest work happens in stillness." That line stayed with me the whole week. I repeated it in traffic, whispered it while brushing my teeth, clung to it when old habits tried to reclaim me. I realized I'd always measured growth by results, by what others could see or what I could prove. But the Spirit? He doesn't rush. He forms things slowly, like roots finding their way through rock. That Friday, I lost my temper at work. Nothing explosive, but enough to feel ashamed. My coworker missed a deadline, and I snapped, not loud, just sharp. I saw the look on his face. I'd hurt him. I sat in my car afterward, hand gripping the steering wheel, and groaned. "God, why do I keep messing this up?" I expected silence. But instead, a thought came, not from me, I was sure of that. "You're not done growing. That doesn't mean you're not mine." Tears welled up. It was so simple. So gentle. And yet, it unraveled years of believing that failure meant disqualification. The next day, I apologized to my coworker. Fully. Without defensiveness. Just owned it. He looked shocked. Maybe even uncomfortable. But he said, "Thanks. That means more than you know." It wasn't just the apology. It was the change in me, the willingness to slow down and try again. To believe that falling didn't mean starting over, it just meant I was still in process. That Sunday, the sermon was on patience. The timing wasn't lost on me, the pastor said. The fruit of the Spirit isn't microwaved. It's cultivated. That means discomfort, waiting, even setbacks. But God doesn't waste any of it. He's building something stronger than success. He's building endurance. As he spoke, I thought back to the seed metaphor. I had wanted to sprout fast, to bloom publicly. But now I saw the deeper miracle was happening in the hidden places. In the quiet apologies. In the way I paused before speaking. In the way I didn't give up when the feelings faded. I was learning to stay rooted, even when I didn't feel spiritual. To stay in prayer, even when my words felt weak. To stay in community, even when I wanted to run. And slowly, the fruit of patience was taking root, not just with others, but with myself. Because love doesn't rush. And grace doesn't give ultimatums. And God? He's more patient with us than we are with ourselves. That night, I sat on my balcony as dusk settled, watching the trees sway softly in the wind. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't all better. But I was still here. Still growing. And for the first time, that was enough. The hardest part wasn't the pain. I knew how to survive pain. What shook me was the waiting. The long, uncertain days where nothing looked different, where I questioned if anything was changing at all. I used to think peace meant feeling calm. No storms. No conflict. Just still waters and soft music in the background. But what I learned in those weeks was this: peace isn't the absence of chaos. It's the presence of someone stronger than it. The outside world didn't slow down. In fact, it got louder. My manager at work started piling on more pressure, shifting deadlines like they were puzzle pieces. A friend stopped texting back without explanation. The car started making a sound I couldn't afford to fix. Life didn't pause to honor my spiritual awakening, but something was different in me. Not perfect. Not always consistent. But underneath the tension, I felt this strange, stubborn steadiness. Like an anchor had dropped deep into the middle of my soul, and I was learning, slowly, painfully, how not to drift. It wasn't dramatic. No epiphanies. Just small, holy moments. Like the morning I sat in traffic, late for work, tension rising in my chest. I reached to turn off the radio and whispered, "Jesus, be here." That's all I said. But in that simple breath, the pressure in my chest softened. I didn't arrive at work full of fire. I walked in with a quiet mind and clear eyes. Or the night I lay awake, mind racing with everything that wasn't going right. Normally, I'd scroll through my phone until I was numb. But that night, I pulled out the old card from June, the one with Galatians 6 verse 9, and read it again. "Don't grow weary." I whispered it like a lullaby to my own restless spirit. At church that week, the worship team played a song I'd never heard before. The chorus said, "You hold me still when the wind is wild." I closed my eyes, and tears slipped down without warning. Not from sadness. Not even from joy. Just a deep, aching sense that I was being held. That's the thing about peace. It doesn't always show up when everything gets better. Sometimes it shows up when nothing has changed, but you have. It's quiet. It's still. But it's unshakable. June called it the fruit that grows in silence. She said, "Peace doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It waits until everything else is loud, then speaks with a whisper you can't ignore." She was right. I started noticing it more often, in conversations where I would have once snapped, but now listened. In the moments I chose prayer over panic. In how I didn't feel the need to control everything like I used to. There was still fear. But it didn't lead me. There was still uncertainty. But it didn't own me. One evening, I visited a nearby lake I hadn't seen in years. It was just before sunset, the sky painted in warm golds and gentle blues. I sat on a bench, legs crossed, jacket pulled tight against the breeze. Across the water, a line of trees stood tall and still, their reflections mirrored perfectly. I thought of all the things I was still waiting for, answers, healing, clarity. But for once, I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel anxious. I just sat with it all. I prayed a quiet prayer. "Lord, if this is what growth feels like, slow, uncertain, hidden, I'll stay. Just don't let go." And I sensed it again, not words, not a vision, but the unmistakable nearness of him. He hadn't abandoned me in the waiting. He was in the waiting. And that, I realized, was enough to give me peace. The storms of life didn't vanish. But the storm inside me was changing. My spirit wasn't frantically searching anymore. It was learning how to rest, even when the answers didn't come. Even when nothing made sense. Because peace isn't what surrounds you. Peace is who sustains you. And in that still place, beneath the noise and worry and unknowns, something was beginning to blossom. Not loud, not fast, but real. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the sun filters through the blinds like a quiet promise. I didn't have big plans, just a food pantry as usual. Same shelves. Same faces. Same rhythm of stacking boxes and greeting folks with tired smiles. But that day, God taught me something I wasn't ready for. How kindness doesn't just flow through you. Sometimes it surprises you. Sometimes it heals you. We were halfway through handing out bags when I saw him. Barely more than a kid, maybe 21, skin pale and sunken, hoodie too big, eyes darting like he wasn't sure if he should be there. He stood in line like he was waiting to be kicked out. June saw him too. She didn't hesitate. She walked right up, smiled like he was her grandson, and said, "Hey baby, come on in. You hungry?" He nodded. Barely. She guided him inside and sat him down, not at the back or to the side, but right at the table in the middle of it all. She didn't ask questions. She made him a plate. While he ate, I refilled the shelves. But my eyes kept drifting over. Something about him felt like a mirror. Later, while sorting canned vegetables, I asked June, "You don't even know his name. Why treat him like family?" She looked at me, almost confused by the question. "Because he is," she said. "Not by blood, but by need. Same as you. Same as me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to doubt. A little while later, the boy came up to the counter. "Thank you," he said, eyes low. "That's the first warm food I've had in a week." He held out a small piece of paper. "This has my mom's number. She's been looking for me. I just didn't know how to call her. Could you help?" June took the number gently and nodded. "We'll call her together, sweetheart." He looked at me, just for a second, and I saw something raw and familiar. That look of someone waiting to be judged, waiting to be turned away. But instead we smiled. Not because we had the answers, but because we knew what it was like to need someone to be kind when you didn't deserve it. After he left, June sat beside me and said, "You know what kindness really is? It's grace with skin on." That phrase stayed with me all week. I kept thinking about how often I'd held kindness back, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted people to earn it. I measured it out like it was scarce. Like I had to protect myself from giving too much. But the Spirit wasn't growing scarcity in me. He was growing overflow. Later that week, I had a hard conversation with someone I'd avoided for months. An old friend I had ghosted during a time when I didn't know how to explain my brokenness. I had left without a word. Shame kept me from going back, but I sent a message. Just a few lines. I didn't expect a reply. She wrote back in less than an hour. "I miss you. I'm glad you're okay. Can we talk?" We did. We laughed. We cried. We admitted things we had buried. And kindness, unexpected and undeserved, found a home between us. That conversation reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you whole. It's not about being nice. It's about seeing people, not for what they've done, but for what they're still becoming. The next Sunday, the message was from Ephesians 4 verse 32. "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." The pastor paused after reading it and said, "The kindness we show isn't about who they are. It's about who He is." I sat in my usual seat, heart wide open. I thought back to the boy in the hoodie, to my friend, to myself. None of us had earned kindness, but we were drowning without it. And when someone chooses to offer it anyway, it's not just good manners. It's divine intervention. That week, I started asking God a new question. Who needs grace with skin on today? Because I knew now, it wasn't always the people who asked. It was often the ones who didn't even know how to. It was the kind of Tuesday that felt like it had nothing to offer. The sky was gray, my inbox was overflowing, and a tension headache had been dancing across my forehead since morning. I was behind at work. I had dishes stacked in the sink. Life felt dull and stretched thin. But somewhere between the usual chaos and the quiet moments I used to ignore, joy showed up, and not the kind I was used to chasing. I didn't wake up joyful that day. Nothing magical happened. But while I was rinsing coffee mugs at the pantry after a long shift, a little girl skipped up to me holding a half-eaten granola bar and said, "Do you love Jesus too?" Her smile was crooked. Her hands were sticky. She looked like she had just discovered the biggest secret in the world and couldn't wait to share it. I laughed. One of those genuine, unplanned laughs that escapes before you know it. "I'm learning too," I said. She nodded like she understood something I didn't. "He makes my heart feel like bubbles." Then she ran off, shoes squeaking against the floor. It was such a small moment. It shouldn't have mattered. But I stood there with a sponge in my hand, heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Joy. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because, for a moment, I forgot they existed. That night, I sat on my porch with a warm mug and no distractions. No phone. No news. Just me and the crickets and a sky full of stars. I breathed in the quiet. And there it was again, that strange, surprising joy. It didn't shout. It didn't sparkle. It just settled over me like a soft blanket. I thought back to the early days of my faith journey, when I believed joy was tied to spiritual highs. Big moments. Emotional worship. Breakthroughs. But what I was learning now was far richer. Joy could rise even in the middle of nothing going right. It wasn't an escape. It was an anchor. I brought it up to June the next day. We were folding donated clothes, and I said, "I keep feeling this weird lightness. Like I should be overwhelmed, but I'm not." She smiled like she knew exactly what I meant. "Joy doesn't wait for permission," she said. "It grows where Jesus is, even if everything else is still hard. It doesn't make sense to the world. That's what makes it holy." She told me about the time her husband passed away. How she would cry and laugh in the same breath. How she felt devastated, but still couldn't shake the feeling that God hadn't let go. "That was joy," she whispered. "Not the loud kind. The deep kind." I carried her words with me. Later that week, I had lunch with a coworker I didn't know well. We ate outside on a bench under a struggling maple tree, its leaves half turned toward fall. She asked why I seemed more peaceful lately. I hadn't even realized it showed. "I think God's doing something in me," I said. She nodded slowly. "That's beautiful." We didn't say much after that. But her eyes lingered on me when we said goodbye, like something had been planted. That's when it hit me. Joy isn't just a feeling. It's a testimony. The world teaches us that joy is earned through vacations, promotions, relationship milestones. But what if the Spirit offers a different kind of joy? One that makes no sense to those measuring life by success? What if the truest joy is found not in what we gain, but in who we find, even in our emptiness? That Sunday, the worship team played a song I'd never heard before. The chorus said, "Even when I'm broken, I still sing." I didn't mean to cry, but I did. Because that's what my life had become, a quiet song in the middle of the broken pieces. Not perfect, not polished, but true. And from that truth, joy was growing. Not like fire, more like morning light slowly filling a room. I wasn't waiting for everything to feel right anymore. Because somehow, through all the confusion and the healing, the Spirit was writing joy into the story anyway. It's funny how we expect God to move in big, show-stopping ways, parting seas, writing answers in the sky, rearranging our lives with dramatic force. But what I was beginning to learn is this: sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. Not loud, not grand, but consistent, steady, quietly faithful. That week, everything felt normal. No emotional highs, no spiritual revelations, just routine. Wake up, work, volunteer, sleep, repeat. And yet, something sacred was unfolding in those ordinary rhythms. A different kind of fruit was forming, one that didn't sparkle or shout, but showed up every single day. Faithfulness. I didn't notice it at first. But then June asked me to lead the pantry opening one morning because she had a doctor's appointment. I told her I'd try. "No," she said gently, smiling. "Don't just try. Show up. That's enough." So I did. I unlocked the doors, made the coffee, set up the tables. I greeted the guests with the same tired smile June always wore after long nights. And as the line grew, so did something in me, a quiet sense of purpose. I wasn't fixing the world. I wasn't preaching. But I was present. I was reliable. I was there. That was new for me. For years, I'd been someone who flaked when things got uncomfortable. I avoided commitment, ghosted people when emotions ran high, backed out of plans when I felt overwhelmed. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was sticking. Not because I had to, but because something inside me wanted to. That evening, I stayed late to clean up. The room was quiet. The folding chairs were stacked, the counters wiped. Nothing dramatic had happened. No salvations. No breakthroughs. Just meals served, names remembered, hands held. But my chest was full. I sat for a moment in the empty space and whispered, "Is this what faithfulness feels like?" It wasn't thrilling. It wasn't emotional. But it felt solid. like bricks being laid in a foundation I never had before. The next day, I was early to work, a small miracle in itself. I brought coffee for a coworker going through a rough patch. I answered emails without complaining. I followed through on things I'd normally put off. And when I walked out that evening, I realized something. I hadn't thought once about whether people noticed that I wasn't doing it to be seen, that I was doing it because it felt right. Later that week, I asked June how she stayed so consistent, so dependable. She'd been volunteering at that pantry for nearly 20 years. Rain or shine, grief or joy, she didn't hesitate. Because faithfulness isn't about feelings. It's about love. When you love someone, or someone, you show up? She went on, her eyes soft but sure. Jesus never promised the spotlight. But he did promise to be with us in the quiet places. And that's where faithfulness grows, when nobody's watching but him. I thought about that for days, and I started to realize, the more I showed up, the more I trusted God with the outcome. I didn't need applause. I didn't need immediate results. I just needed to keep saying yes. Yes to waking up and praying even when I felt numb. Yes to encouraging someone even when I was tired. Yes to doing the right thing even when no one clapped for it. Each yes was a seed, and little by little, those seeds were becoming a life rooted in something more solid than feelings. One night, I stayed late at the pantry again. A woman named Clarissa came in just before closing, panicked and breathless. She had just lost her job and needed food for her kids. I gave her everything we had left, cans, cereal, a few frozen meals. She wept. Not loud. Just tears that ran silently as she packed the bags. Before she left, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for being here." That was it. Just one sentence. But it stayed with me. Because that's what faithfulness does. It plants itself in the everyday. And somehow, God uses it to meet someone exactly where they are. And maybe that's what fruit looks like. Not just in the spotlight, but in the shadows. In the small yes. In the quiet staying. Some fruits are easy to recognize: joyful laughter, patient words, peaceful moments that almost sparkle. But goodness? That one took time for me to understand. It's not flashy. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It shows up in the quiet, in the choices made when no one is watching. For me, it started with a memory I'd been trying to bury. There was a man named Stephen. We worked together 3 years ago. He was kind, soft-spoken. I was still in my keep it surface level season back then. I joked a lot, flirted too much, played it cool, even when I crossed lines that weren't mine to cross. One day I overheard him defending me in a meeting when others were tearing me apart behind closed doors. He had no idea I heard him. But I didn't thank him. I never said a word. In fact, I avoided him after that. Because deep down, I knew I had taken advantage of his kindness. I wasn't cruel, I was careless. And that carelessness left a mark. I never apologized. Until last week. I had no reason to think of him. No reason, except the Spirit kept whispering his name every time I prayed. For days I shrugged it off. Then one night, I finally surrendered. "Lord, if you want me to make it right, open the door." The next morning, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Stephen, just a short note. "Hey, saw your name recently and thought of you. Hope you're well." My heart stopped. God had opened the door. I sat with that message for hours. Then I typed back, "I've actually been thinking about you too. I owe you an apology, from a long time ago. Can I say it?" He replied, "Of course." So I did. I told him everything. How I saw what he did. How I was ashamed of how I acted. How his kindness stayed with me even when I didn't deserve it. His response, "Thank you? That means more than you know. I never held it against you. But it's good to hear." There was no drama. No emotional fanfare. Just two people, separated by years, letting goodness fill a space that once held regret. And afterward, I wept, not from guilt. From relief. Because for the first time, I realized what goodness really is. It's not about perfection. It's about courage. The courage to do what's right, even when it costs you comfort. Even when it means revisiting things you'd rather forget, goodness shows up in the hidden. It speaks truth when silence would be easier. It repairs what's been cracked instead of walking away. I told June about it the next day while we stacked bread deliveries. She didn't say much, just smiled and nodded. "That's the spirit," she said. "He doesn't just cleanse the surface. He clears out the hidden corners." That week, I started paying attention to the small moments where goodness had a chance to grow, holding my tongue when gossip circled the office, leaving an anonymous gift card for a family who'd lost their home, telling someone the truth gently, even when I knew it might not land well. These weren't heroic acts. But they were honest, pure, aligned, and I felt lighter each time. It's strange, really, how integrity, something I used to think of as rigid and heavy, was actually making me free. Because goodness isn't about rules. It's about alignment. Your heart, your actions, your words, all lining up with the spirit inside you. And the more I walked in that alignment, the more peace followed behind me. That Sunday, the pastor said, "If you want to know who someone really is, look at what they do when no one's watching." I thought about Stephen. I thought about the apology I almost didn't send, and I thought about how many years I spent performing goodness instead of living it. But now it was starting to take root, not because I was trying harder, but because Jesus was making me whole, from the inside out. And in that hidden place, where no cameras roll, no crowds gather, and no applause follows, He was planting something eternal. Something good. It crept up on me like a shadow I thought I'd left behind. It was a Thursday night. I was tired, restless, and alone, an old combination that used to lead me down familiar roads. I hadn't planned to slip. But that's the thing about temptation, it doesn't always knock. Sometimes it slides into cracks you didn't know were still open. I was scrolling through my phone, letting exhaustion make decisions for me. Then came the DM, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Harmless enough. Just a, "Hey stranger," followed by a winking emoji. But I knew what that message was. I knew what door it was opening, and for a moment I stood on the edge of it. The old me, the version who chased validation wherever he could get it, he stirred in my chest. That part of me that longed to be wanted, even for the wrong reasons. That part that whispered, "What's the harm? You've been good for so long. You deserve something just for you." And my finger hovered over the keyboard. Every part of me tensed. Then I heard it, not a voice. A silence. A wait, like someone was in the room with me, gently but firmly waiting for me to decide. I locked the phone and set it face down, and I whispered aloud, "God, I can't win this fight without you." Tears stung my eyes, not from guilt, from war, because saying no wasn't easy. It wasn't effortless. It felt like dragging a part of me into the light, screaming. But something deeper had taken root, something stronger than my old hunger. I didn't fall that night, but I didn't feel victorious either. I felt worn. And that's when I realized something. Self-control isn't a badge you wear. It's a battle you fight. Over and over again. Sometimes minute by minute. It's not about being better than your temptations. It's about choosing surrender over satisfaction. The next day, I told June. I expected her to scold me or quote scripture or pat my back and say, There. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Good. You stood your ground. That's what fruit looks like. It hangs on when the wind tries to rip it down." She paused and added, "But don't think the enemy won't circle back. That's why we keep pressing into the Spirit. He doesn't just help you resist, He helps you heal." That word hit me harder than I expected. Heal. Because I wasn't just resisting temptation. I was healing from the reasons I chased it in the first place. The fear of being unseen. The ache of abandonment. The lie that love must be earned, and if it can't be earned, at least it can be simulated. I went home that night and journaled something I hadn't said out loud. "Lord, teach me to want you more than I want escape." That became my prayer. Not for perfection, but for deeper desire, for Him. For wholeness. For the kind of freedom that doesn't just say, "No," but says, "You're not welcome here anymore." I began building safeguards, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. I stopped scrolling late at night. I started texting a trusted friend when I felt weak. I replaced the spiral of shame with conversations of accountability. And slowly, I stopped feeling like a prisoner waiting to mess up. I started to feel like a man being made new. One Sunday, the pastor preached from Galatians 5, the passage that lists the fruits of the Spirit. When he got to self-control, he said something that I'll never forget. Self-control is not about gritting your teeth. It's about yielding your heart. I wrote it down in all caps, because I had lived it, and I was still learning. That week, a different message came through, a temptation of another kind. Bitterness. A coworker undermined me publicly during a meeting. I felt anger rise like fire. I wanted to retaliate. I wanted to put him in his place, but instead, I stayed quiet, not because I was passive, because I was protected. The Spirit held my tongue, and afterward someone came up to me and said, "The way you stayed calm back there, that was powerful." I smiled, not because I wanted credit, but because I knew what it cost. That self-control. It's not always seen, but God sees it. And in the quiet victories, in the choices no one celebrates, the Spirit is planting something strong, something unshakable. A life no longer ruled by impulse, but led by love. Forgiveness was the fruit I had avoided the longest, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I didn't want to let go of what had become part of my identity, the pain, the betrayal, the memory I kept like a scar I didn't want to heal. Some wounds felt safer unhealed. At least you always knew where they were. Her name was Tessa. We were best friends once, nearly inseparable through college. She knew my secrets, my dreams, even the things I never told my family. We laughed through heartbreak, survived near poverty together, and promised we'd always have each other's backs. Until the night she didn't. I trusted her with something fragile. My battle with anxiety, the panic attacks I was too ashamed to name. I told her in confidence, tears running down my face, voice barely steady. A week later, I found out she told someone else. And not just anyone, someone who used my weakness like ammunition. Word got out fast. Whispers turned into rumors. People treated me like I was unstable, dramatic, broken. She never apologized. She said it wasn't a big deal, and that's what hurt the most. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just disappeared from her life. Quietly. Fully, and I never forgave her. Until now. It had been years. Most days, I didn't even think about it. But every once in a while, a flash of bitterness would stir when her name came up. Or when I heard someone talking about friends who break your trust. And every time, I'd shove it down. But one Sunday, our pastor was preaching on love, and not just love for the easy people. Love for your enemies. Love for those who wound you. The uncomfortable kind. He said. Love doesn't ignore the pain, but it chooses to free the prisoner, and often, the prisoner is you. That hit like a cold wind, because I had been holding Tessa in a courtroom in my mind for years. And I realized, I was the one who hadn't moved on. That week, I couldn't shake it. I prayed, God, I don't know how to forgive someone who doesn't think they did anything wrong. And I felt this deep impression in my spirit. You're not forgiving her for her sake. You're forgiving because it's what I did for you. That was the shift. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the wrong. It was about planting something new where the damage had been. I didn't call her. I didn't send a message. I didn't need to. The Holy Spirit was doing something in me, not her. So one night, sitting on my porch with a candle flickering and the wind brushing through the trees, I spoke her name aloud. Just once. And I said, I forgive you. My voice cracked. Then I said it again. Tessa, I forgive you. I release you. I let it go. Tears came fast, not just because I was sad, but because something inside of me had loosened. I didn't know how much weight I'd been dragging until I finally set it down, and in that release, I felt the Father's love wash over me in a way I hadn't felt before. I didn't expect that. I thought forgiveness was something you gave. But that night, I received something. A deeper understanding of God's heart. Because I had betrayed Him more times than I could count. I had made promises I didn't keep. I had run, ignored, doubted, failed, and He had never once withheld His forgiveness. He didn't wait until I apologized perfectly. He didn't demand penance. He offered mercy, wide open, long before I was ready, and now he was asking me to love like that. It didn't make me weak. It made me free. A few days later, I told June what had happened. She smiled and said, "Now that's some good soil right there. That's where new things can finally grow." And they did. The bitterness faded. The flashbacks lost their sting. Even when her name came up again, I didn't flinch. That part of me had been healed. Forgiveness didn't change the past, but it changed me, and that, I realized, was the most powerful kind of love. The kind that doesn't wait to be earned. The kind that flows from the cross. The kind that bears fruit long after the moment has passed. It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a vision or a booming voice from heaven. It was a whisper, so quiet, I almost missed it. But it changed the direction of my life. The morning had started like any other. I was halfway through my coffee, scrolling through emails, when a name popped into my mind, Nathan. A guy I used to know. We hadn't talked in years. There was no reason he should have come to mind. But the thought wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it. But that still, persistent nudge kept tugging at me all morning. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand. It just stayed. By lunchtime, I finally paused and asked, "God, is this you?" The answer wasn't audible, but I knew. There was a peace behind the push. A gentleness to the prompting. I texted Nathan. Just a simple, "Hey man, you doing okay? You crossed my mind today." His reply came fast. "You have no idea how much I needed this. Today's been rough." We met for coffee later that week. He was going through a divorce. Said he hadn't talked to God in a long time. Felt like he'd disappointed everyone, including himself. We didn't solve everything over one latte. But we sat there for an hour, and I listened. I told him I understood that dark place more than I liked to admit. And as we talked, I felt it again, that quiet whisper inside me. This is what I'm doing in you. And this is how I want to use you. It was subtle. Holy. Weighty in the best way. That's when I realized something I'd never fully understood before. The Holy Spirit doesn't shove. He leads. He doesn't guilt trip you into doing the right thing. He invites you. He nudges gently. And when you follow, even in the smallest way, you find yourself stepping into moments that were prepared, not forced. I told June about the coffee with Nathan. Her eyes lit up. "That's the Spirit," she said, placing a hand over her chest. "He's not here to bark orders. He's here to walk with you." She went quiet for a moment, then added, "You know, I used to think hearing from God meant having these dramatic revelations. But now, I believe He's been whispering my whole life. I just hadn't learned to listen." That stuck with me, because I was starting to hear those whispers too, like the day I drove a different route to work for no reason, and ended up seeing a woman pulled over with a flat tire. Something told me to stop. I almost kept going. I was in a rush. But I turned the wheel. Helped her change the tire. She cried. Said she'd prayed 10 minutes earlier for someone to come. Or the night I felt compelled to pray for a coworker I barely knew, only to find out the next day her father had passed away that evening. I didn't tell her. I didn't need to. But I knew God had moved. These moments weren't coincidences. They were invitations. And the more I leaned in, the clearer His voice became, not through sound, but through peace. That peace became my compass. If a thought stirred anxiety or panic, I paused. If a decision brought stillness, even if it was scary, I stepped forward. That's how the Spirit leads. Gently. Kindly. With purpose. He doesn't drag you. He draws you. And when I started to trust that voice, I stopped needing everything spelled out. I didn't need the whole plan. I just needed to stay close. I remember one night, walking through my neighborhood as the sun dipped low. I'd had a hard day. Nothing major. Just disappointment. Exhaustion. Life pressing in. I stopped under a tree I'd passed 100 times before. For some reason, I looked up. The branches stretched wide above me, golden light catching on every leaf. I stood still and whispered, "What now, Lord?" And I felt it, not words. Just the presence. The knowing, keep going. I'm still with you. That was enough. Sometimes it's the softest guidance that keeps you moving when the world is loud. Sometimes it's not the booming declaration, but the gentle hand on your shoulder that says, "This way." And sometimes the most powerful part of walking in the Spirit isn't what changes around you, but what changes in you. A peace that no longer panics. A voice that doesn't condemn. A love that leads, not to control, but to restore. That's the Spirit. And He was guiding me now, every step of the way. It happened at the grocery store, not a place I expected anything sacred. I was just trying to get in and out before the dinner rush. I had my list, my headphones, my mind on everything but people. But there I was, standing behind an elderly woman who was clearly flustered, her wallet open, coins dropping on the floor. The young cashier looked bored. The people in line were growing restless, and something inside me said, "Slow down." I took out my earbuds, bent down, picked up her change, and smiled. "Take your time," I said. "You're doing great." She looked up at me with tired eyes, and something shifted in her face. Her shoulders relaxed. Her lips trembled into a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't preach. I didn't say a word about Jesus. But I knew He was there, in that moment. In that smile. In that stillness. That's when it truly hit me. This fruit growing in my life, it wasn't just for me. It wasn't just to heal my brokenness or calm my storms. It was meant to nourish others. June had told me that months ago. "The fruit of the Spirit doesn't grow just to be admired," she said. "It grows to be tasted, by the people around you who are starving for something real." I didn't understand her then, but now I did. I was starting to see it everywhere. In how my words landed softer with people. In how coworkers asked questions about my peace without me even bringing up God. In how strangers seemed to open up the moment I gave them my full attention. I wasn't trying to be impressive. I was just being available. And somehow, that was enough. The change hadn't been dramatic. But it had been deep. People noticed it not because I announced it, but because it changed how I moved in the world. How I listened. How I responded. How I carried light into rooms that once felt heavy. One afternoon, my younger sister called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in a while. Not because we didn't love each other, but because life had pulled us in different directions. She was raising 2 kids, working long hours, exhausted all the time. I used to get frustrated with her short answers, her delays in replying. But something in me had softened. So I answered with patience. We talked for a while, and then she said, "You seem different lately. Happier. Calmer. What's going on?" I smiled. "I've been learning to stay close to Jesus again." She went quiet for a second, then she said, "I've been thinking about going back to church. The kids ask questions I don't know how to answer." I didn't push. I didn't lecture. I just said, "I think that's a beautiful place to start." We made a plan to go together the next weekend. I hung up the phone, leaned back in my chair, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This wasn't just my journey anymore. This fruit, love, peace, patience, it was growing in ways I couldn't measure. It was showing up in other people's lives quietly, like roots stretching underground and linking to trees I didn't even know I was connected to. I thought about John 15, where Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches." It finally made sense. The fruit didn't come from trying harder. It came from staying connected. Staying close. And the more I did that, the more the Spirit used my life, flawed, still in progress, as a place of shade and sweetness for others. At the pantry that week, June saw me deep in thought and asked, "Where'd you go just now?" I laughed. "I'm just realizing. I don't think I'm growing for myself anymore." She grinned wide. "Now that's the fruit. When your life becomes a vessel for someone else's healing, you're walking in step with the Spirit." I looked around the pantry, at the shelves, the chipped floors, the regular faces, and felt something holy in the ordinary. Because kindness isn't always loud. Love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes they show up in how you pack a grocery bag, how you speak someone's name, how you stay when it would be easier to go. The Spirit doesn't just transform your life. He uses it, and the fruit He grows in you, when it's real. Starts feeding the people around you whether you know it or not. It was just a phone call. That's how it started. My brother, Aaron, had always been a complicated subject. We weren't enemies, but we'd been walking on eggshells for years. Our childhood was marked by competition, silence, and two different versions of how love should look. I chased connection. He chased control. I felt things deeply. He bottled everything up. After our parents passed, the distance between us grew. We only spoke when absolutely necessary. Holidays, emergencies, splitting responsibilities for the estate. And even then, our words were measured. Safe. Surface level. Never going near the hurt that had lived between us like a wall no one wanted to name. So when he called out of the blue one Wednesday afternoon, I answered with hesitation in my voice. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he replied, then paused. "You got a minute?" I braced myself. "Yeah. What's going on?" He launched into it. Frustration over something in the estate paperwork, a miscommunication with the lawyer. His voice got sharp. Accusatory. It was like he had a fire inside and nowhere to put it except on me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the old me rising up. The defensive version. The one that knew how to hit back. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have reminded him of all the times he dropped the ball. I could have pointed fingers, escalated, proved my point like I used to. But someone, held me back. It was as if the spirit himself stepped between my impulse and my voice and whispered, "You don't have to win this. You just have to love him." So I breathed. And instead of lashing out, I said, "Aaron, it sounds like you're under a lot of pressure. I get it. But I'm not your enemy here. We're on the same side." Silence. Then, like a deflating balloon, his tone softened. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so tired of all of it." I hadn't fixed everything. We didn't hug it out over the phone. But for the first time in years, we didn't fight. We listened, and that moment became a seed. One that wouldn't have existed if I'd chosen my pride over peace. That's what I'm learning. Love in conflict isn't about being right. It's about being present. It's about seeing the wounded child behind the angry voice and deciding not to meet fire with fire. The fruit of love, real, spirit-grown love, doesn't disappear when tension enters the room. That's where it's tested and refined. June always says, "The fruit that survives fire is the kind that lasts." And that week, I realized something else. Conflict isn't the opposite of love. It's the opportunity to show it, not the sentimental kind. The kind that costs you something. Like silence, when your flesh wants to speak. Like a soft answer, when your pride wants to roar. Like listening, even when you know you're not the one who's wrong. At the pantry later that week, I saw that kind of love again. A mother and daughter came in arguing, quietly but clearly not hiding it. The daughter was maybe 15, arms crossed, eyes rolling. The mom looked worn thin, trying to keep peace while managing two little ones beside her. As they packed their bags, the girl muttered something sarcastic and the mom snapped back. Then something surprising happened. Instead of defending herself, the mom leaned in and said, "I'm sorry. I know I'm stressed. I didn't mean to take it out on you." The girl blinked. Her walls lowered. She whispered, "I'm sorry too." I nearly choked up just watching it. Because that was love, in the middle of conflict, humbling itself, extending grace, creating space. And in that moment, I understood why Scripture says love is patient. Love is kind. It is not easily angered. Because love doesn't avoid conflict. It transforms it. That Sunday, I found myself praying for my brother, for real. Not the forced kind of prayer, but honest intercession. I asked God to heal him, to soften him, to show him the kind of love that doesn't keep score. I didn't expect anything back. But the next week, I got a text. "Thanks for how you handled things. I know I'm not always easy. I appreciate you staying calm. Maybe we can talk again soon, just as brothers." Tears came to my eyes, not because everything was fixed, but because something was beginning. That's what love does. It doesn't wait for peace. It brings it, even into the hard places, even into the history that hurts. because the fruit of love, when it's real, shows up when it's hardest to give, and somehow, by the Spirit's leading, it keeps growing anyway. It came with a phone call. The kind that splits your life into before and after. June had passed. There was no warning. No time to prepare. She'd gone to bed after a full day at the pantry, laughing, folding coats, telling me I needed to smile more, and never woke up. Peaceful, they said. A good death. But it didn't feel good. It felt wrong. Like someone had stolen color out of the world and left everything a little colder. I sat in my car for an hour after hearing the news, unable to turn the key. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I didn't cry, not right away. I just felt hollow. Shock is cruel like that. It lets grief walk in quietly and sit down without asking. June had been more than a mentor. More than a friend. She'd become the clearest glimpse I'd ever had of Jesus in human form. Her voice still echoed in my head. Stay rooted. Even when it hurts. I didn't want to be rooted. I wanted to run. I wanted to go backward, disappear into the numbness I used to know so well. But deep inside, something held me. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have roots. Because while my heart was breaking, my faith wasn't. The Spirit didn't shield me from the loss. He met me in it, and I felt it in the stillness. When I walked back into the pantry 2 days later, dreading the quiet corners where her voice used to fill the room. I thought I'd fall apart. But as I stepped through the door, a warmth wrapped around me, quiet and steady. People gathered, hugging each other, sharing stories, tears flowing freely. There was no pretending. No shallow comfort. But there was presence. There was peace. A kind of strength I hadn't expected. It wasn't loud. It was anchored. That day, I learned something I'll never forget. Fruit doesn't die in winter. It endures. And it's in seasons of loss that you find out what's really been planted. I remembered something June once said over coffee on a gray afternoon. Storms don't scare me anymore, she told me. Because I know the roots go deep. They've been watered by every hard thing God's brought me through. I don't have to feel strong to be steady. She wasn't strong that day. She was unshakable. And now, even in her absence, she was still teaching me what that looked like. Over the following weeks, the ache didn't vanish. Some days, the grief came like a wave. A song would play, or someone would laugh like she used to, and I'd find myself needing to step outside for air. But underneath the sorrow, there was something solid. I didn't retreat from God. I leaned and I prayed. Not with fancy words, but with silence. With breath. With broken sentences that ended in tears. And the Spirit met me there, in the spaces where no one else could follow. He didn't give me answers. He gave me presence. That was enough. At her memorial, they let me speak. I didn't read a poem or quote a scripture. I told the story of the first time she ever said my name with kindness. Of how I came to the pantry hoping to hide, and left with hope I didn't know I needed. She taught me, I said, voice shaking, that even when life is dark, love can still grow. And the things rooted in Christ? They don't die. They multiply. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Others followed, not for me, for her, for the Jesus she carried, and maybe, just maybe, for the seed she helped plant in me. That night, I sat under the stars, looking up into a sky she loved, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me know her, for letting her love shape me." I didn't feel healed, but I felt held, and I realized the pain didn't mean something had gone wrong. It meant something mattered. June mattered, and the fruit of her life wasn't buried with her. It was growing in every life she touched, including mine. I didn't recognize myself at first. It was a Tuesday morning, cloudless, calm. I had just finished locking up the pantry after an early delivery when I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. Same eyes. Same frame. Same lines on my face from years of trying to keep it all together. But there was something different. Peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes from a good night's sleep or a compliment. It was deeper, settled. Like it lived there now, and in that quiet moment I saw it. The garden, not outside. Inside. I remembered where I started, bruised, burned out, spiritually starving. I remembered the lies I used to believe, the shadows I used to walk in, the walls I built to keep people out and shame in. And now, standing in that reflection, I realized the walls were gone. Not torn down. Healed through doubt. I wasn't just holding it together anymore. I was rooted. Over the next few weeks, the evidence kept showing up in small, sacred ways. A friend confided in me, something raw and painful, and instead of offering advice, I listened. Really listened. With patience I didn't know I had. Another day, a man I'd once avoided at work pulled me aside. "I don't know what's changed in you," he said, "but I feel safe around you. Like you're not trying to be anyone else." That stayed with me, because for years I'd been performing, hiding behind versions of myself that were palatable, predictable, forgettable. But now, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't proving anything either. I was living, and the fruits were visible, maybe not to everyone, maybe not all at once, but in the slow bloom of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It wasn't about me. It was about him, the gardener who had tended to my soul when I thought it was barren. That Sunday, they asked me to speak briefly at church, not preach. Just share. I stood at the front, nervous at first. I wasn't used to microphones. But I told the truth, about where I had been, who I had been, and how the Spirit had changed everything, not by snapping his fingers, but by staying with me through every storm, every silence, every stumbling step. I said, "God didn't give me a brand new life overnight. He gave me a seed. And he kept watering it. Even when I tried to walk away. Even when I doubted it would grow. And now, it's blooming. Not because I got it right, but because I stopped running." The room was still. Then someone clapped, and I wept, not from pride, but from awe, because I knew who I had been, and I knew who I was now. Later, a young man approached me with tears in his eyes. "I've been where you were," he said. "And I'm just now trying to let God in again. Hearing your story, it gave me hope." We talked for a while. No formulas. No expectations. Just two people standing in a garden neither of us deserved. That was the moment it all clicked. Fruit doesn't exist to decorate your life. It exists to feed others. To show them what's possible. To remind them that the Spirit still moves, still heals, still grows beauty out of dust. The next morning, I sat with my Bible open to Galatians 5, tracing each word like a path I had walked barefoot, every step costly, but holy. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I smiled, tears warming the corners of my eyes. This wasn't a checklist. It was a miracle. A garden that grew from surrender. And it was still growing. In conversations. In quiet prayers. In how I treated strangers and forgave family, and responded when the world pressed in, not perfectly, but faithfully. Because now I knew. Fruit doesn't grow in the absence of hardship. It grows in spite of it. It grows when we remain, when we abide, when we trust that even in dry seasons, even in grief, even in silence, God is still at work, still tending, still pruning, still loving. And as I closed my Bible, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. "Thank you, Lord, for never giving up on me." It happened on a Thursday. The pantry was unusually quiet. A storm had rolled through the night before, knocking down power lines and soaking the city in sheets of relentless rain. Most folks were running behind or staying home. I almost didn't come myself, but I did. And that's when I met Eli. He was sitting alone on the back steps when I arrived. Hoodie pulled low. Hands stuffed in his sleeves. He looked up briefly when I walked by, then dropped his gaze like he was used to not being seen. I recognized the look. It was the same one I used to carry. The silent plea to not be noticed, and yet, desperately hoping someone would. I brought out a warm cup of coffee, handed it to him, and said nothing at first. Just sat beside him in the cold. After a few minutes he spoke. "I don't belong here." I turned to him. "Why do you say that?" He shrugged. "I'm not churchy. I don't believe like you do. I've messed up a lot." I nodded slowly. "Yeah. I know that feeling. He looked surprised. So I told him the truth. Not the polished version. The real one. About where I had been. What I'd carried. Who I used to be before love broke through. I didn't dress it up or make it sound heroic. I just let the truth settle like dust between us, and when I finished, he didn't speak right away. Just stared out toward the street and whispered, "So there's still a chance for someone like me?" I felt a lump rise in my throat. "There's not just a chance," I said. "There's a whole garden waiting." He came back the next day, and the next, sometimes to help, sometimes just to sit in silence. But each time, he stayed a little longer. I started to see something shift. His shoulders relaxed. His words got slower, steadier. One day, he asked if we could pray together, just quietly, just for a moment. That night, as I locked up and walked to my car, I heard the Spirit whisper to my heart, "Now you're planting." It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was holy, because now I understood. The fruit the Spirit had grown in me wasn't meant to stay with me. It was seed, and the world is full of dry soil, hardened hearts, wounded stories. People wandering through life, wondering if anyone sees them, if there's still hope for something more. And God's answer? Us. He uses healed people to help heal people. He sends those who once wandered back into the wilderness, not to prove anything, but to guide others out. That weekend, I had lunch with my pastor. He asked how I was doing, and I told him about Eli. About what it meant to watch someone else begin to bloom. He smiled. "The truest sign of spiritual maturity," he said, "is when you start investing in others. When you stop asking, 'What can I get from God?' and start asking, 'Who can I love with what He's given me?'" Those words stayed with me. I started seeing opportunities everywhere. A neighbor going through a divorce. A coworker drowning in self-doubt. A teenager at church who lingered a little too long by the exit. I didn't preach. I didn't fix. I just showed up. With presence. With patience. With the fruit that had been cultivated through my own storms. And each time, I felt it again, the quiet, sacred joy of passing on what had been passed to me. One morning, Eli asked, "Do you think I'll ever get to where you are?" I laughed gently. "I hope you go further." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, but I meant it, because I knew the Spirit wasn't done with me, and He was just getting started with Eli. That afternoon, I wrote in my journal, "Lord, let my life be soil. Let it break open for others to grow. Let your Spirit plant through me, because the truth is, none of this is just for us. It's for the people we haven't met yet. For the ones still hiding in back corners, still believing they're too far gone, still waiting for someone to offer them a cup of coffee and a glimpse of grace. And when we choose to pour out instead of hoard, we find ourselves in the middle of something eternal. A cycle of love that never runs dry. Because the gardener doesn't just grow fruit in us. He sends us out to plant. I thought growth would feel like progress, like forward motion. Upward steps, more light, more fruit, more joy. But then came the pruning, and it didn't feel like growth at all. It started with a conversation I wasn't ready for. A friend, someone I had begun to walk closely with, someone I had prayed with, laughed with, told me they were moving. A new job. A new city. Just like that, they were gone. No drama. No falling out. Just distance. And something in me ached. I didn't realize how much I had leaned on their presence until it wasn't there anymore. Around the same time, an opportunity one had been praying for at work fell through. One I thought was a door God had opened. I had even thanked Him for it in advance. But it didn't happen. And beneath the surface, that old voice crept back in. Maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe God's pulling away again. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it. I showed up to church the following Sunday with a smile on my face, but my heart was tired. Worn down by the quiet loss of things I thought I was supposed to keep. June used to say, "There are seasons when God removes things not because they're bad, but because they're not meant to go where He's taking you." She called it pruning. I never liked that word. It sounded violent. Cutting. Taking away. But I remembered once watching her trim the rose bushes outside the pantry. She said, "If I leave the dead branches, the bloom won't reach its full beauty. It'll stay tangled, too crowded to grow." And now I understood. Pruning doesn't mean punishment. It means the gardener is paying close attention. He sees where the fruit is getting choked out by clutter, where something good is keeping something better from breaking through. Still, it hurt. I brought it to God in prayer one night, sitting on the edge of my bed, the lights off, hands open. "I don't understand what you're doing," I said. "Why take away the very things I thought were answers to prayer?" And gently, almost like a breeze brushing past my spirit, I sensed the reply, "Because you asked me to grow you." Tears welled up. Not from shame. From realization. I had asked for this. I had prayed, "Make me fruitful." And God, in His mercy, hadn't just planted seeds. He was clearing space. Not out of anger, out of love. That shift changed everything. I stopped resenting the loss. I started looking at what it made room for. I spent more time with Eli, mentoring him more intentionally. Without the distraction of trying to hold on to too many things, I had time to sit with him, answer questions, pray with him. I watched his heart open wider week by week. He started helping at the pantry regularly. Started smiling more. Started asking how he could serve others. That never would have happened if I had clung to everything God had asked me to release. Sometimes we think love means holding on, but love also looks like letting go. Letting go of what we thought we needed. Letting go of the fear that pruning means failure. Letting go of the belief that every closed door is a setback, instead of a redirection. That week, I journaled something simple. Pruning is proof He's preparing more fruit, because He only trims what He intends to grow. And in that stripped-down place, no illusions, no distractions, I began to see new sprouts pushing up through the soil. New friendships, new peace, new clarity. Not because everything was going right, but because the gardener was tending carefully, with intention, with love. That Sunday, the pastor read from John 15. "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." I closed my eyes as he read it again, not as punishment, but as preparation, and I smiled. Because now I knew, when God prunes, He's not walking away. He's leaning in, closer than ever. The day was quiet. No fanfare, no dramatic skies. Just the soft hum of a Saturday morning as I walked up the hill behind the church, coffee in hand, heart unusually still. This had become my place of reflection, the gentle slope lined with trees, the ground worn smooth by footsteps and prayer. I stood beneath the largest tree, one whose branches had stretched across decades. Its leaves shimmered in the breeze, and I thought to myself, this is what I want to be. Not impressive, not perfect, but rooted, alive, consistent. A tree that bears fruit in every season, not because the weather is always good, but because the roots go deep enough to find water when everything above ground looks dry. That's what the Spirit had done in me. Slowly, quietly, faithfully, and I could finally see it now, not just in how I felt, but in how I lived. Love was no longer a concept. It was the way I moved through the world. It was in how I spoke to people I once avoided. How I forgave without needing to be asked. How I stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. Joy wasn't situational anymore. It bloomed in the middle of grief, in early mornings at the pantry, in long conversations with Eli, who now helped lead new volunteers like he'd been doing it all his life. Peace had settled like a permanent resident in my soul. I no longer panicked in the unknown. I didn't have to control everything. I knew who held it all. Patience had found a rhythm in me. In traffic. In unanswered prayers. In the long, winding paths of other people's healing. Kindness became my default. Not out of obligation, but out of overflow. It just happened, like fruit hanging low enough for anyone to reach. Goodness was no longer a goal I chased. It had grown quietly in my choices, in my apologies, in the integrity I carried when no one else was watching. Faithfulness defined my steps. I showed up now, not just when I felt spiritual, but when I didn't. When it rained. When it hurt. I stayed. Gentleness surprised me. It softened how I led. How I responded. How I corrected with love instead of pride. And self-control. Oh, how the Spirit had taught me. Not through shame, but through grace. I didn't white-knuckle my way through temptation anymore. I surrendered. And he held me steady. It wasn't perfection. I still stumbled. Still had moments of fear and failure. But something had shifted. The fruit wasn't occasional anymore. It was consistent. Seasonal storms came and went, but the tree remained. That morning, I was asked to share my story at a small church gathering. Nothing formal. Just a group of people hungry for something real. I stood in front of them, not with a sermon, but with a testimony. I told them about the man I used to be, lost in shame, addicted to performance, numb from years of running. I told them about the first time I walked into Calvary Chapel and sat in the back row, hoping no one would speak to me. I told them about June. How her smile and her steady love became the first water my soul had felt in years. I told them about pruning, about loss, about surrender, and then I told them the truth I now knew more than anything else. The fruit of the Spirit isn't for show. It's for strength, for survival, for service. It's what Jesus grows in us so that others can find shade, find nourishment, find Him. When I finished, no one clapped. They didn't have to. There were tears. Silent nods. People hugging each other without words. Because this kind of fruit doesn't draw attention to the branch. It points to the vine. That night, I walked the hill again, beneath the same tree, and whispered a prayer I knew by heart now. Thank you, Lord, for planting something eternal in me. Let it keep growing. Let it feed others. Let it remain. And I knew, even if the seasons changed, even if storms came again, I would not be shaken. Because when Jesus grows the fruit, it lasts. Through summer and winter. Through abundance and loss. Through joy and pain. A tree planted by streams of living water, bearing fruit in season and out of season. Forever. I used to think growth was something you could measure. That you could line it up in progress reports, check boxes, or visible outcomes. But the truth is, real growth isn't always seen. Sometimes it's felt. Sometimes it's known only in the stillness, when your soul no longer shakes the way it used to. That's where I am now. Not perfect, but planted. And that has made all the difference. What began as a whispered prayer in the dark, asterisk, God, I can't do this anymore, asterisk, became the start of a journey that led me to love, to surrender, and eventually to fruit I never imagined could grow in someone like me. And what I've learned along the way is simple, but life-altering. God's love doesn't just heal us.it roots us.it grows something in us that the world can't take away. And it does it with such gentleness, such care, that even our most broken seasons become fertile ground. I've walked through doubt, temptation, disappointment, and grief. I've lost people. I've lost plans. I've lost parts of myself I thought I needed. And yet what remained, what grew, was stronger than anything I could have built on my own. The love of Jesus changed everything. Not all at once, not with flashes of lightning or perfect prayers, but steadily, faithfully, like water dripping over stone, carving beauty into the hard places. And now, looking back, I see it wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about becoming whole. A life that bears fruit isn't a life that avoids storms. It's a life anchored in a love that outlasts them. And if you're watching this right now, if you've walked through seasons of dryness or weariness, if you've questioned whether anything good can still grow from the soil of your story, let this be your reminder. Yes, it can. It already is. Because no matter how far you've wandered, no matter how many times you've failed, no matter what's been done to you or what you've done, God's love still reaches for you. And it's not a shallow kind of love. It's patient. It's restorative. It goes deep into the places no one else sees, and it begins to grow something eternal. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. Self-control. Not as traits you perform, but as fruit that simply begins to bloom when you stay close to the vine. The best part? It's not just for you. As that fruit grows, it becomes nourishment for others. It becomes light in their darkness. A reason for them to hope again. A reason to believe that if God can change you, He can change them. That's the legacy of a Spirit-filled life. Not perfection, but presence. Not performance, but peace. And above all, love that never ends. So, If you've found even a glimpse of yourself in this story, don't let it stop here. Take a breath. Be still. Ask Him to start something new, or continue something that's already begun. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing. Because when Jesus steps into the garden of your heart, things change, things grow, and what He plants, it lasts. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I pray it stirred something deep in you, something hopeful, something real. If it has, I invite you to subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this, true stories of grace, healing, and redemption that speak to the heart and stir the soul. And before you go, I want to leave you with one simple question. What fruit is God trying to grow in you right now? And are you willing to let Him? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, stay rooted, stay hopeful, and never forget, what grows from Jesus' love will never stop bearing fruit.